Morning, everyone. My name is Michael DeGeorge. I'm here posting our video in my house on this glorious day, Thanksgiving Eve, November 26, 2025. It's going to be a blessed day because, like I always, every day is a blessed day. And before I get into the theme of my video, as I said in my previous video, I am going to read an excerpt from every one of the daily gospel devotional that my dear friend Pastor Bob gave me. His author is Paul David Tripp, New Morning Mercies. And I will read a little excerpt from every day that I post a video. And today being November 26th, the excerpt is, can you tell the story of redemption in one sentence? Sin has driven us out of the garden, but grace drives us right into the Father's arms. And I don't know if I can tell the story of redemption, but I like to think to myself that ever since September 21st, God has helped me be redeemed, and that I've become a better person every single day to be more like Jesus. And I think I can tell the story of redemption. Yes, I think I can, because the last 2 months especially has been truly, truly awesome for me. And I feel like I'm on the right track, and it's all because of God. And it's all part of his plan. And last night, I had a wonderful time at the Sea Adela's house. And dinner, had some great food. The cutlets were particularly great. And we shared a lot of laughs. And it was an honor and a privilege to be with them. So I just want to say to them really quickly, thank you very much for last night. And you guys will continue to be a blessing in my life. I love you guys very, very much. And the theme of my video today is Thanksgiving Eve, because that's what today is, the day before Thanksgiving. And before September 21st, if you'd have told me what was my greatest passion, it wouldn't have been Jesus Christ. It wouldn't have been following God. It would have been professional wrestling. As I'm wearing a pro wrestling shirt right now. Daniel Bryan, his real name Bryan Danielson, he used to go, yes, 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 and the crowd used to do it in unison. He was one of the biggest stars in wrestling over the last 10 to 15 years. He's retired now. He's an AEW pro wrestling commentator. But he was one of my favorite wrestlers. And pro wrestling is something that's always been a passion of mine. And I can remember the first day I watched a pro wrestling show. It was July 4th, 1985. And how ironic that I think of July 4th now. I don't think of it in positive terms, because July 4th was the day my dad passed away, when he collapsed right behind me on my kitchen floor as I was sleeping, as I've shared in a previous video. And he ended up not getting up, and he ended up passing away later that night at the hospital. So July 4th is not always a day that now I think of very fondly. But I do remember July 4th fondly when I was a kid, because that's the first time I watched pro wrestling. And I wasn't trying to watch pro wrestling. I was actually trying to watch a New York Mets and Atlanta Braves baseball game. Because that night, the game was only on TBS, Turner Broadcasting Systems, which used to show the Braves games. Because WAOR, the station that used to show the Mets games back then, had the fireworks on in New York City. And anybody who's been to New York City will know that they have the greatest fireworks in the country, still do to this day. So back then, they wouldn't show the Mets games, they would show the fireworks ceremony. But the problem with the game is that it was a 3.5-hour rain delay. And as a result, the game didn't start till a little after 11 o'clock, and the game ended up going 18 innings, and the game didn't end until after 4:30 in the morning. So the fireworks celebration at Fulton County Stadium, where the Atlanta Braves played, took place on July the 5th. The Mets ended up winning the game in 18 innings. But that's not what I remember. What I remember was, if you ever watch a baseball game when there's a rain delay, what happens is that they show programming on that station to fill the time until the game either resumes or, in this case, starts back up. Well, the first thing the announcer, Skip Carey, said is, let's take us to last week's episode of World Championship Wrestling. I'm like, what is World Championship Wrestling? And then the first thing I see is the happiest guy on the planet at that time, a guy named David Crockett, who was the announcer back then. And he says, we're going to have a great hour and a half of exciting World Championship Wrestling here at the studios in Atlanta, Georgia. There may have been 75 people there. To put it in perspective, this Sunday when I come to Greece Assembly of God Church, there'll probably be more people, to put it in perspective. But he was the happiest guy in the world. And the first thing he does is get to the ring. A guy named Jim Miller was the announcer. And here comes these two jacked up guys with tattoos, painted faces, shoulder pads with spikes on it. Of course, if you're a wrestling fan, you know who they are. They are the Legion of Doom, the Road Warriors. And they came to the ring with a guy named Precious Paul Ellering as his manager, and he was holding a Wall Street Journal. And I always thought that was cool because my dad used to go to Worldwide News every week, and he would purchase the Wall Street Journal. That was his favorite paper, but he couldn't always get it at Wegmans because the Wegmans would usually either have the Democratic Chronicle or the New York Post. So as a result, he got the Wall Street Journal every week at Worldwide News. I remember Paul Ellering having that. And then the Road Warriors squashed these two losers. And then they cut this nonsensical promo, and I was hooked. Just like that. I was a pro wrestling fan. And then the next person that came on the stage to talk was the world champion. He was wearing sunglasses indoors, but he had a $5,000 suit on. He had a $2,500 alligator shoes. And the reason why I know this is because he would tell you. He was, of course, the Nature Boy Ric Flair, arguably the greatest professional wrestler of all time. And once I saw the Road Warriors and Ric Flair, I became a pro wrestling fan. And the interesting thing about it is that the World Wrestling Federation was the biggest professional wrestling company in the world. But that wasn't the first wrestling I watched. The first wrestling I watched was that night. And Jim Crockett Promotions was the promotion that had World Championship Wrestling on TBS at the time. And why that's important when it comes to Thanksgiving is that Jim Crockett Sr., who was a famous promoter in the Carolinas, was the one who came up with pro wrestling on Thanksgiving in the early 60s. Because the idea was that the Carolinas was kind of like a Bible Belt. So his philosophy was that families would get together, they would say their prayers, they eat their Thanksgiving dinner, and then later that night, they would send their kids to the arena, preferably to Greensboro Coliseum, and they would watch pro wrestling. And they would get new fans because the kids would be going. And it worked. They would set up their biggest shows every year on Thanksgiving night. And for over 20 years, Greensboro Coliseum and Thanksgiving night became a major, major tradition. And it really peaked in 1983 when the first ever closed circuit event happened for professional wrestling. Basically meaning that for the first time ever, if you weren't there in the arena that night, you can watch the show live in movie theaters across the country. Basically, that's how they called it, why they called it closed circuit. And that night, over 70,000 people across the country watched the first Starrcade. And it was sold out to Greensboro Coliseum, about 19,000 people. And the theme of it was the flair for the gold. It was Ric Flair's quest to regain the World Heavyweight Championship from then world champion Harley Race. It was inside a steel cage. It was a magical night. Gordon Soley and Bob Caudle were on the call. And before I keep going, I want to say thoughts and prayers to Bob Caudle's family. He passed away about 2 weeks ago at the rightful age of 95 years old. He was a great broadcaster. So was Gordon Soley. And I remember seeing that show years later, because obviously I was too young to watch it live. But Starrcade became a tradition for Thanksgiving night. And 1983 was a pivotal night for pro wrestling on Thanksgiving because they not only had that show, but they had a sold-out show in Madison Square Garden. They had a sold-out show at the Reunion Arena for World Class Championship Wrestling. The Madison Square Garden show was a World Wrestling Federation show that was run by Vince McMahon Sr. at the time before he eventually passed away. And Vince McMahon Jr. took over. There was also an AEWA show at the St. Paul Civic Center in St. Paul, Minnesota. That promotion was run by Vern Gagne, a legendary pro wrestler in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And the amazing thing about that show was that was Hulk Hogan's last match in the AWA before going to the WWF early in 1984. And Hulkamania was then born, and he became arguably the biggest star in wrestling history. So Thanksgiving in 1983 really peaked pro wrestling's popularity. In the subsequent years, they would run Starrcade 84, 85, 86 at Greensboro Coliseum with a lot of success. And then 1987 came, and they decided we want to go into pay-per-view, because at that time, pay-per-view became the money generator for professional wrestling. And the World Wrestling Federation took over. They had 3 WrestleManias at that point. The first one in 1985, second one in 1986. It was in 3 different locations. And then finally, 1987 was the crescendo. They had almost 80,000 people sell out the Pontiac Silverdome to watch Hulk Hogan beat Andre the Giant for the first time ever. And it was a body slam that if you watch WWE programming to this day, they show on the intro. That's how famous it is, 38 years later. And as a result, the WWF became a juggernaut on pay-per-view. So Jim Crockett Promotions wanted to do that. And they figured what better way to do it was Thanksgiving night with the 5th Starrcade 87. And ironically, they dumped it Flair for the gold. Ric Flair in a steel cage trying to win back the World Heavyweight Championship, this time from Ronnie Garvin, who was the then champion. There was one problem, though. Vince McMahon Jr. wanted to get in on that Thanksgiving tradition and decided that he was going to have his own show on Thanksgiving night called the Survivor Series. And thus, Survivor Series was born, Thanksgiving night 1987. The amazing thing about that was he told the cable companies, Vince, that if you don't show my show, you're not getting WrestleMania 4 the following year at Trump Plaza. So the cable companies had a choice, and they choose wisely. They didn't want to let that gravy train of WWF get away. So thus, Starrcade 87 was only shown in 3 states. State of Illinois, where the show was being held at, the UIC Pavilion in Chicago, Illinois, and Jim Crockett Jr.'s home base of North and South Carolina. All the other 47 states showed Survivor Series, including here in Rochester, New York. And I remember my mom and dad paying the $20 so I could watch that night's Survivor Series. And I remember a couple of my buddies, Juan Rivera and Visna Noon, came over to the house to watch that Survivor Series with me. I miss those days greatly. And Thanksgiving tradition continued only this time now with the World Wrestling Federation. The next 3 years, they had Survivor Series on Thanksgiving night. Subsequently, they would have it on Thanksgiving Eve, all through the 90s. And then eventually, once football became so big that football would have 3 games on Thanksgiving, not just the Lions and Cowboys, but a 3rd game on Thanksgiving night, wrestling moved the Survivor Series to the weekend. And thus this year will be a 30-night Survivor Series, Saturday night at Petco Park in San Diego, California. I'm very excited about that night. And that's why Thanksgiving has always been one of my favorite holidays, if not my favorite, because I always was excited not just to be with my mom and dad and have turkey and have stovetop stuffing and rice and whatever else I was eating, salad, but it was always going to be a big pro wrestling show that night. Pro wrestling was my safe space. It was something that I would always go to whenever I was having problems with myself, when my sister and brother were having problems, when my parents were having problems with each other. Go watch pro wrestling. It was my safe space. And it always came through for me. But now I've realized that there's only one safe space for me, and that's God. Jesus Christ is now my safe space. And as I'll share tomorrow's Thanksgiving Day, will probably be the hardest one yet in my entire life, but it also could be the most rewarding too at the same time. And it's because it will be the first one and I won't have either one of my parents by my side, but it will be the first one that I'll have Jesus Christ on my side and by my side, touching my shoulder. But that's for tomorrow, because as you know, in pro wrestling, when it's done right, there's always a hook, there's always a cliffhanger. So I'm going to leave you with that cliffhanger, and I'll see you tomorrow when I post a video about how much Thanksgiving Day means to me. So like this video, subscribe to the channel if you want, because I love people, I love animals, I love you all, because life is good, God is good, God bless you all, and thank you for listening.